Okay, having covered the facial expression, communicative aspect of emotions and how they're adaptive, let's talk a little bit about the physiological response to emotions. We've talked a little bit about the nervous system this semester, not in too much detail, but just as a reminder, there are two different parts of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So these are kind of two different sides of the same coin in some ways that excite and calm you down. So the sympathetic nervous system is the one that is associated with more excitement and more arousal. The parasympathetic nervous system is associated with calming, non-emergency functions, things that take longer and are more focused toward the future, like digestion, reproductive energy, things like that. So when people talk about the fight or flight response that you might get when you are scared or stressed or excited or something, that is the sympathetic nervous system ramping up, pushing energy toward your ability to escape danger or fight back from something. Your pupils dilating so you can see better, less salivation so you're not wasting that energy, accelerated heartbeat to pump your blood faster, dilating your bronchi and your lungs to get more air, inhibiting digestion because you don't need to digest food if you're going to be dead soon. So there's no reason to digest stuff if you're in danger. Put that energy elsewhere. And on and on. But all the stuff that is going to help you in the short term to make sure that you are safe and survive and push energy away from stuff that's more long term. Then, when you're calming down, your parasympathetic nervous system can come into action and shift that energy more again toward these long term things. So, a lot of this has, it's a relatively simple kind of either or sort of switch in some ways, but the general arousal that you might feel from your sympathetic nervous system is relatively consistent in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of nuance to it. It's either ramping you up or calming you down. It's one or the other. But the way that we experience emotions is much more complex physiologically than and cognitively than this kind of excitement, calm sort of binary. So the way that we subjectively experience emotions seems more like we feel an emotion, I feel sad, and you've experience the things that come with sadness, or I feel afraid, and then you experience the things that come with fear. I understand maybe not, it doesn't always seem like that, or not everyone feels that way, but that is a very common way that people might think about experiencing emotions. The more common theories about how arousal and our construal of different things kind of go against that, though. Most of them have the physiological reaction coming sooner in the equation and have us kind of reacting to that in some way. So the James Lange theory of emotions, James here being William James, one of the early American psychologists we've talked about before, their kind of order in which things are happening is that you first experience a physiological reaction, and your brain is reacting to that reaction, trying to interpret what the emotion is based on that reaction. A little bit differently, the Cannon-Bard theory says that these things are really not related very much. You are having these kind of separate emotional and physiological reactions. They're not really influencing one another so much. And for this one, it's not the case necessarily, according to them, that arousal has to happen first. It might be that they happen at the same time. It might be that the emotional experience starts happening before the physiological experience. I'd like to also introduce, though, a sort of kind of counterintuitive theory from social psychology, the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory, that suggests that our emotions are a little bit more subjective in a way. That we have a physiological reaction, and remember, that might be just kind of general arousal that you experience. It's not necessarily, it's different for every emotion, but you kind of feel this arousal. And once you feel that arousal, you kind of search in your environment and you kind of look and go, why am I feeling this way? And you just kind of latch on to things in your environment to explain the fact that you are excited. So the kind of downside of this is that we're just kind of coming up with rationalizations after the fact for why we might be feeling this way. So it's very subjective, and we can misattribute emotional labels to arousal, and we might be wrong about why we're feeling something. So, kind of a classic study that looked into this. It brought male participants to this park in Vancouver that has all these very big kind of scary bridges going over these kind of valleys in the woods, and so you're up a couple hundred feet on some of these bridges, and they told these participants that they were going to meet someone there that was part of the study, and in every case they used the same female research assistant who was there to meet them to, ask them some questions and talk about some studies. But the real point of the study was to see their reactions to this research assistant. So they randomly assigned people. Everybody walked across these bridges, but they randomly assigned people to different conditions, either meeting the research assistant in the middle of the bridge or meeting the research assistant at the end of the bridge. Kind of at the other end on a bench, basically, somewhere that was not as stressful or anxiety producing as being like kind of up in the air. So what they found was that people reacted to her rather differently. They asked them some different questions, like opinions about her, how much they would be willing to participate in studies later, and gave them the opportunity to contact her later. And they found that in the condition where they met her in the middle of the bridge, they were much more likely to contact her. They rated her more highly across all different kinds of things, including like attractiveness, for example, than people did when they met her on solid ground. And what this suggests is that the men in the middle of the bridge condition are misattributing their arousal from being scared from being on the bridge, even if it's kind of like, unconsciously being scared. They're misattributing that arousal, that excitement, to the person they're talking to. Because remember, they're having the same type of conversation. They're all talking to the same person. There shouldn't be much of a difference in their behavior or their reactions to her. But consistently, people on the bridge reacted differently than people on solid ground where they, weren't afraid. So this indicates that people are capable of misattributing their arousal to the wrong stimuli, that they're attributing it to their excitement about meeting this person and their connection with them, when really it's probably more likely that it has to do with the physical circumstances they're in. And I think a lot of times we can apply this to our everyday lives, where maybe you're frustrated by something, and then you get mad at somebody else because of something small you did, and you think like, oh, I'm angry that they did that, but really you're angry because of something that happened beforehand. And we might carry these emotions throughout the day and then attribute them to things kind of subjectively and often incorrectly. So just useful to think about how these theories differ in how we attribute emotions to different stimuli and how we experience them. That the James Lange theory says we have this physiological response that we then interpret, and that sometimes that that response is going to be unique for different emotions. The Cannon-Bard theory, that these things kind of happen more or less separately. And then kind of maybe the least intuitive one, the two-factor theory from Schachter and Singer, that we have this physiological response, we interpret it in a sometimes subjective way, and we put a label on that arousal, even if it might be the wrong emotional label or it might be about the wrong stimulus, but then our experience is like, oh, this is fear because of this stimulus. So some competing ideas and some evidence that emotions are very subjective interpretations of our general physiological excitement in some ways. I also want to kind of start wrapping up talking about emotions by mentioning how important they are in our cognition. I think a lot of times people think about emotions as kind of they're more, well, they're emotional. They're not like facts. They're not like the thoughts that we have. But that is kind of a misleading thing to think too, because um, emotion and cognitions inform one another. They interact with one another. It's not just that our construal of different things affects our emotional experiences, it's that our emotional experiences affect the way we think about things. Our decision making, our memory, our behavior, they're all influenced by, maybe even like infected by emotion in a way that memories, the way you remember something, or even how accurately you remember something, might be colored by your emotion. Your decision making might be different depending on the different emotional states that you're in. For example, you might be more optimistic if you're happier. You might be more pessimistic if you're sad or angry. And our behavior certainly changes based on our emotional reactions. The mental processes that we go through can differ depending on if we're feeling good or feeling bad. One perspective, the affect as information hypothesis, suggests that you really can't even study thinking, judgment, decision making without taking emotion into account, because it's not possible for us to engage in thinking without emotion coming into play. It's not always the strongest effect that's going on, or it's not always affecting all of us equally, but we are always experiencing some sort of emotional reaction and tying that into the things that we're experiencing and the things that we are thinking. Um, Emotion also is really important for our relationships, right? The people that you know, especially the people that are close to you, the interactions that you have are affected by the emotions that you experience with those people and the emotions that you share with those people. So our social sides of our worlds are also kind of balled up into this whole complex stew with emotions and cognition. The way you feel about your friends or your parents or your other loved ones, that has to do with the emotions that you've experienced toward them and with them, and it's really hard to pull those things apart. And again, emotions are adaptive in this sense, because we probably would not feel as close to people or be able to cooperate with them or stick by them or accept their help when we need it as much if we didn't have emotional components to these relationships that we have. All right, next video I'm going to move on and start talking about anxiety and stress.